That's right. Good news you can use right here on the Boomer Beat. I am your host, Beverly Mahone, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce again. Now, you know this person has got to be important because I don't have your back more than once, unless you're giving some really good information. But he is giving some really great information, so it gives me great pleasure to welcome back again a man who is a wealth of knowledge about wealth. And who doesn't want to know about how you can build wealth strategies in retirement, especially since so many of you right now, like myself, are heading down that fast road to retirement. So, welcome to the Boomer Beat a second time, Ryan Ponsford. How are you?
I am fantastic, Beverly. Thanks for inviting me back. Didn't screw up bad enough last time, so we'll see if we can push the envelope a little more this time and be a little wild and crazy, huh?
Yeah, how about that? Well, my mother used to always say, "You're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed," meaning, "Wow, you're wide awake." And I'm only saying that because of the fact that where you are in California, it's 9 a.m. and I've been up a while, had my tea, so I'm raring to go. So you're
Perfect.
bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning.
Right
All
on.
right. All right. So
Well, what are we
before we
doing?
get started, let's talk about your background because it's interesting because you have a degree in psychology, which doesn't necessarily relate to financial anything. So tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, I would say one might think, you might be surprised, behind every money decision is a human, most money decisions, right? And behind humans are a lot of psychology, but it wasn't intentional. I was actually a pre-med major originally and had gone to Point Loma Nazarene University here in San Diego and was a biology chemistry major, planned to go to med school, loved the concept, loved the coursework. And partway through, kind of had this epiphany of I wasn't sure if it's a field I want to go into. And I would say probably one of the very few actually intelligent thoughts I had at 19 years old was, I felt like that industry might end up being driven by insurance and pharmaceutical companies. And I just had this issue with feeling like I wanted to do what's right. And if those types of organizations were going to be influencing what I could do to treat people, I was worried about that. And it was a long path to get through to realize it may or may not be something you wanted to get into. So at the time, I needed a summer job. And I wanted to stay. I was down in San Diego, wanted to be able to stay here. It's not inexpensive. So I thought, well, shoot, I need a job so I can afford a house and all this nice stuff. And my roommate at the time had gotten a job at Bank of America as a teller. And I thought, well, shoot, if Rob can be a teller, I can be a teller. And so I applied, and I'd had some sales experience selling Cutco knives, which if you own Cutco knives, they are fantastic. And it's probably the best sales training on the planet. And so apparently I really sold the pen well to the recruiter. She ended up hiring me into banking, but told me, hey, I don't have a job as a teller. I have something else that pays a little more and has more flexible hours. Are you interested? I said, well, those are both great things. Sounds great. So she showed me a picture of a little ATM machine with the phone and said, this will be your office. It's like an ATM machine and a phone. That doesn't make sense. And it's in a grocery store. I thought, oh, this is weird. So she gave me a clipboard and an apron and a bunch of brochures and released me into Lucky Supermarkets as one of the first people in San Diego County to walk up in the aisles of the grocery store with no branch and sell people home loans, credit cards, checking accounts, and savings accounts. So that was my intro into the financial world. And what became fascinating is I realized that when people are in the supermarket, they're thinking about beans and cheese, not about home loans and credit cards. And so getting their brains to transition from one place to the next ended up being an interesting project. And so I was taking some psychology classes at the time and was really just interested in kind of behavior, consumer behavior, how people do what they do, why they do what they do, how they make decisions. And so I started applying all that stuff to my in-aisle grocery store banking. And there was no training at the time. So I ended up writing all this training. Is really just around right brain, left brain orientation, how you get people to think differently. And so I just fell in love with the whole concept. So I ended up switching my degree to industrial organizational psychology, which was kind of a blend of psychology and business. And my career in the financial world ended up accelerating pretty quickly. Ended up building that whole program, ended up covering a large section of Southern California, went from there into commercial banking into private banking, where we just dealt with very affluent families. And I'll tell you a couple things I picked up in that process. One is I could build really cool spreadsheets with amazing math that would help people understand all the things, clear black and white arithmetic of what they should do for retirement, pre-retirement, accumulation, distribution, transition, all these phases. And I'd show them all the math and they'd say, that's neat. I want to think about it. And I could never figure out what they wanted to think about. And so I realized that I had the same issue that I was having in the grocery store aisles. People don't make decisions based on math and logic. They make decisions based on intuition, emotion, and behavior. And so I started realizing that the whole financial industry, and to give people good financial advice, it's not really about the math. Like, I can show you the math all day on anything. It's almost more about behavioral modification and good habits. And so much of the time I realized that a few things need to happen. I had to get people to emotionally connect to the outcome, the place they wanted to go. You couldn't just say, what do you want to, how much money do you want to have at retirement? I want $3 million so I can spend, $12,000 a month and, whatever their math is. That's great. Nobody connects to that. But to say, I want to have a home that is comfortable place where I know my grandkids can come. I want a yard with a tire swing because I grew up with a tire swing and I want my grandkids to swing on that. I want a nice big open room that we can have meals together in, all these things. And I want to be able to travel. I've never been to, Russia. I want to go see that part of the world. And I'd love to be able to take my spouse and do these things because traveling is so meaningful and I love learning about culture. And so when you start applying some vision and emotional connection to that outcome, it completely changes people's propensity to take action.
So
right?
Let me ask you this then, Ryan. So then how does that relate to someone making a decision about taking out a reverse mortgage?
Yeah, great question. So, if there's ever a time when psychology comes into play, it's in the reverse mortgage industry, right? Because it's a very counterintuitive concept to what people have been led to believe. And so I spend more time trying to help people overcome the psychology of it than the math, right? The math is super simple. It's one of the most creative, misunderstood, underutilized things on the planet in the financial world, right? It's way more than a loan. It's a financial strategy. It's a financial instrument that does what no other loan does. In some ways, I explain it as, we try and put it in the loan box. And when you put it in the loan box, you're comparing it to loan. It's like a loan. It's collateralized by your home, but the things it can do are not what any other loan product can do. And so you really have to get, and then, that sounds great. The math is good. But now we have this issue. The reverse mortgage industry, unfortunately, has done a poor job of making this a last resort kind of a thing for people that have not done well. And so there's a psychology that makes people not want to be part of that.
And let's talk a little bit more about that psychology as it relates to all that's been going on with the economy and with the pandemic. How has this impacted someone's, thinking about the necessity or the importance or wealth building when it comes to a reverse mortgage?
So specific to the reverse mortgage, people right now are, probably more skeptical than they've ever been. Nobody believes anything anymore, which is, good and bad, I guess. But so people are trying to get answers to what can I do and what if. So I would almost say there's a movement toward managing risk. When you're in the world of unknown, people have fear. When they have fear, they want to control something. And so probably the most common thing I've seen us use these for is to create options for people. So when people don't have options, they get nervous, right? And most people's largest expense in or even before retirement, for the most part, is their mortgage. And so what we've done a lot of is help people say, okay, I've got a $300,000 home and $100,000 mortgage, and I'm paying $1,000 a month in this mortgage, right? If something goes wrong, right? If I lose my ability to generate income or my investments see a decline like they did at the beginning, and we've seen some volatility just this week, right? It's been a bouncy ball. And so if I have to take a withdrawal from my investments when that market's down, I'm realizing those losses and it can have a very devastating effect on my portfolio. But if I have to make a traditional 30-year mortgage payment, I have no choice but to take that withdrawal in order to pay that mortgage. And so what we've done for a lot of people is say, okay, let's illustrate a scenario. let's say this economy stays bad. Let's say we see a downturn in the market, your investments are down, and you're concerned about taking these withdrawals. And let's say you lose your income. So what if we didn't make that mortgage payment? What would that look like? So the strategy there is replace that existing mortgage with a reverse line of credit, right? So now I have full optionality. A lot of people think in a reverse mortgage, you automatically don't make payments, right? What it does is gives you the option of whether or not to make your monthly mortgage payment. You still pay property taxes and homeowners insurance and, keep the house in good condition, all those things like you would on your traditional mortgage, which is very important to remember. But as far as the payment is concerned, right, you have full flexibility. So what we would illustrate is, let's say this goes on for 2 more years. Let's say you've almost paid off your house, and we have this need to pay off our homes, which is a whole nother psychological thing we could get into. People think they need to pay off their homes. That's a psychology question. You pay it off to free up your mortgage payment, right? It's a cash flow equation, not because there's any great benefit to having a free and clear home. In fact, it stinks because you have no economic return in your equity, right? And so it's really that's a whole retraining of the mind thing too. But so now you have the option. So we would illustrate is, let's assume for 24 months, you don't make a payment, because the economy continues to be rough and bouncy and whatever else. And then we see recovery, and 24 months from now, everything's back. You're confident again. You go back to making the payments you were making. So what does that look like in the future? Well, you might add a year or two onto your payments in the future, right? So you might not pay off your home as soon as you would have if you plan to pay off your home, which again is debatable to begin with. But at the same time, you've set up this line of credit that the interesting thing is your credit line grows every single month. I think we talked about this last time about how that credit line grows, which a lot of people don't understand. So by the time you now fast forward, so let's say somebody's in their 60s and does this, right? They do this, they don't pay for 24 months, they go back to making their payments. Well, you fast forward 5, 7, 10 years, they're now in a position where their mortgage is either paid down or they're managing the debt comfortably. Maybe they're just making interest-only payments, but the credit line is growing. So now they may have $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 available to them in a credit line that they can access if they need it.
Ryan, is a reverse mortgage a viable retirement strategy?
100%, absolutely. To me, it's a great complement to an existing plan, right? As a standalone, it's moderately interesting, right? Because you can free up your mortgage payment, and that there's some upside there. If you're constrained to make your mortgage payment, it's nice for that. But when you use it as a complement to all of your other strategies, to me, that's where it really gets fascinating. And that's where financial advisors and professionals are starting to really take a legitimate look at this and starting to integrate it into their overall planning, because it becomes this complementary tool that we now have access to additional funds to move in and out of, to allows. And so here's a common one I just talked to a guy yesterday about, which was he was in a position where he needed to take a little more risk than he was comfortable with in his investment portfolio in order to hit the returns he needed, right, to meet his retirement objectives. Okay. But the risk there, if I take more risk, that comes with more downside.
Right.
So if I happen to be so unlucky as to hit the downside of that risk equation, I'm toast. So you're really rolling the dice. So in this case, we're able to put the line of credit in place. So we knew we essentially had a buffer or a floor where if he saw those downturns, he had an alternative he could pull that income from, allow the portfolio to recover. And now you get sort of back to receiving those kind of projected average returns as opposed to annual returns, which is what really hurts people when it comes to that kind of sequential return in retirement.
All right. So this gentleman was interested in his investment portfolio. What are some of the other top ways you are seeing reverse mortgages being used?
Yeah. So, I mentioned just payment optionality is by far, one of the most interesting. The big thing right now that we hear a lot of, and this is even, I think, come more so with with COVID and what's going on there, is one of the greatest financial risks that most people will face in retirement is some type of need for extended care, right? Something's happened and they, in most cases, either they're going to a facility or they need somebody to come in the home. And here's an interesting thing. Pre-COVID, AARP did a study that said 92% of people preferred to stay in their homes if they could, right? And most people would agree with that. 92%. That's pre-COVID. I haven't seen the study yet post-COVID, but I'm going to guess for anybody that had an experience where a family member was in a facility and you were waving at them through a window with masks on and a hazmat suit, right? That's probably not something you ever want to repeat again. I mean, there's some very sad, tragic stories of people not being able to touch and feel their loved ones in their final days of life because they couldn't go see them in this facility. And so there's a more of a drive to stay in home. So we see this a lot as a way to, let's look at this early on. Let's set this up as early as possible because of the compounding growth of the access to credit, because that equity line grows every month. The sooner you do it, the larger it becomes. Most people's healthcare risk, the probability is that it'll be late 70s, maybe early 80s. So you start that growth in your early 60s. By the time you're in your late 70s, early 80s, that growth is compounded tremendously. And now you have this pool of assets you can access to afford to have somebody come in your home, so you're not in a facility, or your kids aren't having to come care for you when they've got 3 kids of their own that they're running to sports and doing all their thing, and they don't have time to care. They'll do it, but it puts a lot of strain on them, or they're having to pay for the in-home care. They'll do it because kids will, that's what they do, and we all do. But at the same time, that's not what most people want. They would like to be able to self-fund. So it becomes a great funding mechanism for that future healthcare risk. That's a big one that we see. And again, that's a sooner than later type of a strategy. The sooner you start that, the better that outcome becomes.
Well, speaking of children,
Uh-huh.
so if I decide I want a reverse mortgage and my daughter says, well, what's going to happen to the inheritance? I want this house when you die.
Yep.
What
then?
Is that a myth? I mean, does it mean that she is not entitled to the inheritance if I pass away with a reverse mortgage?
Yep. So that is a bit of a myth. So a lot of people think that the bank somehow takes ownership or title on your home, right? It does not, right? So it's not as though you put this in place, when you're gone, the bank takes whatever's left. A lot of people have that misconception, and it's just untrue. So from that perspective, it's identical to a traditional loan, right? With a few logistical exceptions. So in a traditional loan, right? If you have a house and you owe $100,000 and it's worth $200,000 and you pass away and you leave it to your kids, they've got to figure out what to do with the $100,000 loan. They're either going to refinance it, or they're going to sell the house or do something to keep paying the mortgage. But if they sell it, they get that remaining equity of $100,000, right? No different in a reverse mortgage, right? Same identical thing. When you pass away, then we're going to look at, what do you owe on the home and what's it worth? If it's worth more than you owe, kids can do what they want. They can sell the home, they can refinance the loan, same type of deal they would have on a traditional loan, and they would receive whatever equity was left over at the end. What's unique on a reverse mortgage is there's also the scenario. Let's say you did this and you never made a payment for 20 years, right? And we see real estate Armageddon, right? We see 2008 again, and we fast forward, all of a sudden you owe $400,000 and your home's only worth $300,000. Now what? Right? There's $100,000 difference. That is a deficiency, right? You owe more than your home is worth. So some might say, oh man, you've screwed up. You've lost. Well, in my opinion, actually you win, right? You've had use of all of that money, even beyond the value of your home. So financially, arguably you've won, right? The bank is in theory lost. But what happens there is with these loans, the government, now there's multiple types of reverse mortgages. Most commonly, the one people are going to do is what's called a home equity conversion mortgage, which is a reverse mortgage that is insured by the FHA. So the government entity insures this loan. And so the borrower, when you borrow the money, you're actually going to pay into the mortgage insurance fund that gives you access to this insurance pool, to where if you were to pass away and your home was upside down, that insurance fund actually pays that difference. So neither you nor your estate nor your kids are liable for that deficiency. So it pays that off, and you don't have any liability for that deficiency of debt, which is super important, because otherwise they got to come up with the difference. Or you could have the scenario like in today's world, if you short sell your home and it's upside down, you know what you get at the end of the year for that deficiency of debt that's forgiven? You get a 1099 for income tax, right? You get taxable income, and that feels great. You just short sold your home. Now you get another $100,000 in income to you, just bumped you into a higher tax bracket, and the IRS sends you another bill for $30,000, right? That doesn't feel good. So in this, because it's non-recourse and that policy is in place, it actually, it recovers that. So there's no tax liability for that deficiency as well, which is important.
Who makes a good candidate for a reverse mortgage? I mean, can anybody do it, or would you recommend that, there be some things in place for these particular individuals?
So my take, there's a couple criteria. And for the government product, the minimum age is 62. Right now, there are some proprietary, privately lended ones that will go lower than that. And this is a growing marketplace of these equity release programs, all kinds of things that are out there. Some of them are loans, some of them are equity types. So you could do a lot of research on this. But again, the most common is the government insured one. That's minimum age of 62. So that's kind of your first hurdle. From a loan to value, how much do you owe on your home? The FHA is only going to lend enough. They're going to assume you're never going to make a payment, right? And so they're only going to lend so much that if you never make a payment, they don't want this thing to go upside down, right? The last thing they want is to have to pay some deficiency because you owe more than your home is worth. And so they're careful about that. And so when you look at really I use for kind of rule of thumb ballpark is about a 50% equity position, right? So a loan to value. So if your home is worth $400,000, if you owe 200 or less, then this becomes a very viable solution. You can go a little more, a little less, depending on your age and depending on interest rates. So the older you are, the more they will lend. So as you get older, you can actually owe a little bit more. And the lower interest rates are, the more they will lend. So timing gets interesting on this if you think about where we are today. So a higher home value, obviously you can borrow more if your home's worth more. That's kind of obvious. It's the collateral on the loan, right? And lower interest rate. You can't control age, right? I haven't figured that out. I don't think you can, but you can try. Mentally, I guess you could have some. You could, but not really. So you can't control your birthday, I should say. But so you've got home value and interest rates is really your two variables. So what you really want to maximize or optimize this loan is high home values, low interest rates. And if you look at where we are today, we're sort of in this, is real estate likely to go up, down, or stay flat? And most would argue, well, I don't see us going up a ton, maybe eventually, but right now we're in this kind of weird spot where I think we're maybe flat, could soften a little bit if interest rates go up. And then same thing on interest rates. Are we likely to say flat, go down, or up? Most people would say, based on what we're seeing economically, probably flat, maybe up. Now, granted, we've been saying that for 5 years, but it feels like we're getting closer to a rising interest rate. So arguably, low interest rate, high home values, we're in really an opportune time to start looking at these. So 62, 50% or better equity position. And my opinion, it ought to be something you look at, whether you're speaking to a financial professional, if you have an advisor. Unfortunately, most of them don't understand how these work. So, that's the hard part, is that we educate them every day, all day. That's a large part of my role, is partnering with financial professionals. So if you have an advisor that, needs help, we can help them understand how it works, the math and economics of it. Then we just got to get over the psychology.
That was a question I was going to ask a couple of questions later, but since you brought it up,
okay,
let's talk about it.
Let's do it.
How do you know for sure that your financial advisor has a pulse on what a reverse mortgage is and how they can really help you in your retirement?
Yeah, well, specific to the reverse, there's a whole question of how do you know if your financial advisor has a pulse on anything is a question to begin with. And that's another show we'll do another time. That's a whole different story, but specific to reverse mortgage. Unfortunately, it hasn't been something that's been well promoted or educated around in the financial space, in the financial advisor community. There's a lot of people out there doing a lot of work in it, doing some great stuff, but it is very much underrepresented in financial planning. So most won't. So I would go in assuming your advisor doesn't know. I've probably spoken to 3,000-4,000 of them in the last few years, and I would say less than a dozen have understood all the mechanics. So there might be some basic questions you can ask, is, to how well do you understand these? Is a nice start, nice open-ended, and see how they respond, and they'll likely be a little vague. To me, the big question I always ask that is probably the most misunderstood is, do you understand how the line of credit growth feature works? Right. And that question is critical, because that line of credit growth is one of the most interesting strategic uses of this in a financial planning environment. So a financial advisor that knows how to proactively use one of these will understand line of credit growth.
So can you explain that a little more in detail?
The line of credit growth?
Yes,
I can. So the easiest way I think I can explain it is, if you think about having a regular home equity loan or even a credit card. I don't like credit card example because it has bad connotation, but let's go with it. So let's say you have a credit card and you got approved for a $10,000 credit line. Okay. and you charge something up and you owe $1,000 on your credit card. And as we know today, if you want to get more credit, higher credit limit, you have to reapply, or they'll go do a search and see if 10,000, now we'll give you 15,000, right? And so you have to reapply and go through that whole process. Well, the way this works is a little bit different. Let's say you have a 5% interest rate on your credit card. So you know on that $1,000 that interest is going to accrue at 5%. Well, what's interesting on this type of a loan is that that same total interest rate that you'll be charged on whatever you owe is being credited to your full credit limit. So in that example, that if you had a 5% all-in interest rate, now there's some pieces that make up that full rate, but that is going to get credited to that full credit limit. So at the end of that year, that $10,000 credit limit will go up each month until it gets over 5%. So that's the interesting part, is the credit facility. The total amount that is lent to you grows every single month and compounds. It's compounding growth every single month, which again gets really fascinating when you start looking at this over time.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. If you've already taken out equity in your home, how does that impact a reverse mortgage? Because so many people have taken out equity, for home repairs, for vacations, for this or that. So
Yeah.
now
So
we're
yep.
looking at a reverse mortgage. What do you do?
Well, the key to this is, you have to replace a reverse mortgage has to be in first position. So you're going to have to refinance and pay off those previous loans, right? Because if you have an existing loan, for another lender to come in, the lender on there has to be willing to subordinate, right? Which means they're going to move below that first loan position, which means if there's ever a default, they don't get first choice of getting paid back, right? So that's called subordination, great financial term, right? No lender is going to subordinate behind a reverse mortgage because you don't have to make payments, the debt increases. So no lender in their right mind is going to take a second position behind a reverse mortgage. So that's probably a little more technical than most people care about, but whatever. So the reverse mortgage will have to pay that off. So it really just becomes a function of can you borrow enough, or can we lend enough to make sure we can pay off all that existing debt on the home and then replace it essentially with this reverse mortgage.
Okay.
That makes
All
sense?
right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it does make sense, but I think that's probably one of those gray areas where people aren't real clear about, well, if I've pulled all this equity out and then I want to turn around and have a reverse mortgage, how does that affect?
Well, it's really no different than if you just had a regular loan, right? So if you still owe $200,000 on your loan that you got when you purchased your home, it's almost like you've taken $200,000 in equity and your home's worth $500, right? So that's the same thing as if, you had it free and clear. Now I took $200,000 out to go do a bunch of home repairs. It's really the same difference. It's what you owe on the home. So you're kind of still targeting that roughly 50% equity position. So if you've taken out more than 50% of your equity, it can get a little trickier, again, depending on age and interest rates and all those variables. So if you think you're close, and the easiest thing to do is to reach out to somebody you trust, right? Which is hard in this industry because there aren't a lot of people in the industry. Some are better than others. So it is critical to have the right type of professional and, shop around, talk to people. It's not what they do, it's how they do it and who they are. And all this stuff, it's, you want to connect with people that you can trust and, put your interest before their own.
And speaking of connecting, since time is running down here, how can folks connect with you or someone who is a part of AAG, American Advisors Group? I think we should say that too.
Yep. So, our easy way is our website. It's aag.com. There's actually a little secret spot in the top right that says for professionals. So if there's financial professionals that are paying attention, or you want to route to our team specifically to, maybe have a little deeper, broader look at this. If you go up there, then there's an easy way to go into financial professionals. We've got webinars and things. I use LinkedIn, so people can always connect with me there. It's just my name, Ryan Ponsford. You can do a quick search. I'm an easy connect there. I love interacting with people there. And so there's a lot of ways to reach us. Website's a nice, easy tool. There's some basic calculators and things there that people start getting an idea as to what they have available. And then we have loan officers in almost every community. So if you go there and do a loan officer search, we have people on the ground in many, many communities across the country, and having somebody local that you can kind of see face to face and high five them when things are going well is always a nice thing too.
All right. Well, Ryan, this was a nice interview. Nice to see you again. And I have many more questions. So I think the next time you come on, because you're going to have an open invitation now, I think you'll just be my BFF.
I am in. These are fun. I do some of these, and this is always one of my favorites. Beverly, you're wonderful. I loved your new intro, by the way.
Well, thank
the
you.
Intro was, I'm sitting back here jamming to your tune and all that stuff. That was awesome. So I don't remember that from last time. So that's a great upgrade. So keep trucking, and I'm happy anytime I can join you. This is always good.
Well, definitely for Financial Literacy Month. So you can expect that I'll be reaching back out again. All right, guys. Thank you so much for those of you. I saw some of you who were tuning in for the live broadcast. So thank you so much for those of you who did. Thank you to those of you who shared the video, and those of you who will see this at a later time. Remember this: you have gifts to give the world. So find your unique voice and prosper and stay empowered along your journey. See ya. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Beverly. Appreciate it.
Good news you can use for your life. If you want to get the info that'll help you throughout your life.